And I asked these questions. If we increase testosterone in a male, will it increase the sexual response? And of course the answer is yes. It was really kind of curious because Freud's the first one to do an experiment with testosterone. He had gentlemen, he thought he could cure anything. So, and he had gentlemen who were gay, and he decided, well, you know, if I give them testosterone, it'll make them more male, is what happened. And so he did. He gave them testosterone. And of course, what happened? Did it make them more male? These were gay males. Did they become more masculine? Any guesses?
How would it do it? How would it make it more violent?
More violent, okay.
More aggressive?
More aggressive. More sexually aggressive.
I was hoping that too. They'd be more aroused. Just kidding.
But it didn't change their orientation. They were just having more gay sex, homosexual encounters than they were before. As curious as that is. Can we cause the same effect by electrically stimulating the brain? Is there an area of the brain that we can increase somebody's sex drive by stimulating that area?
Yeah.
You are correct. There is an area. As a matter of fact, when somebody is suffering from, wait a minute, not Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is a neurological degenerative process, and at a certain point during their degenerative process, the area of the brain that controls the sexual response will become affected, and at that point they become very sexually active, extremely sexually active. And this is right at the beginning of their Huntington's disease. So they will have this extreme promiscuity that they go through, as curious as that is. And it's one of the ways that we diagnose Huntington's disease, is with this rampant promiscuity that they go through. If we cut the vagus nerve, will he lack sexual response?
I don't know what that is.
The vagus nerve controls your breathing. If you get your vagus nerve cut, then you can't breathe. You can't digest food. Yeah, it's a little, and it has to be sexual response. And the reality is, yes, it will destroy their sexual response. We have, if you know anything about quadriplegics, someone that was wounded during the war, or a war, or was in an IED explosion. Those individuals very often will be quadriplegics, and people think, well, they can't have sex. But the reality is they can. As long as their vagus nerve is still intact, they can still have sex. If we put two adults of opposite sex together, will it lead to an increased secretion of certain hormones? Just because one person's a male and the other's a female, will it increase the hormones?
Yes.
Yeah, it does. As strange as that may seem. No matter what the situation is, male and female, they will always secrete more of the sex hormones. Can we change blood flow to the brain with select visual stimuli? In other words, by showing you a picture, can we change your reaction by showing you a select picture? Well, a good example is your sister from Windsor. Yeah. Okay, so she sees the sheep being butchered, yeah, and she starts crying. Yeah. So yes, we can. A good example of this would be pornography. And this is one of the reasons why pornography is so popular. If we change the circumstance of the interaction to include dangerous stimulation, will it cause a change in the response of the individuals? So if we get, and we see this in movies all the time, two individuals, they're in a dangerous situation, they're trying to escape from something, all of a sudden they fall into bed together. What in the world is going on? Is this true? Does danger stimulate sexual response?
Yeah.
And the answer is, yeah, you are correct. It does. It increases your adrenaline. The adrenaline increases your sex drive, as confusing as that may be. So two individuals that live through something together, a male and female who live through something together, they are drawn to one another by that experience. They see each other as, or the one will see the other as a protector, and therefore are more likely to have a sexual encounter after that. Looking at people with frequent sexual response, what we find higher levels of hormones. Why are they? Why do they react more frequently to sexual stimulation? Is it because of their hormones? Is it an increase in hormones? What do you think? I mean, if you're going to create a hypothesis, would you assume that somebody who has frequent sexual encounters has a higher hormone level than somebody who doesn't?
I doubt it, because like there's more frequent levels than I think maybe with less frequent they'll peak up high maybe.
So you don't think the hormone level is going to increase because of the increased sexual response? It has to. Yeah, that's the only way they can respond sexually. Can we correlate high levels of hormones with frequent sexual response? Is this a problem with select individuals? That they have, their hormones are out of balance, and therefore they are more likely to respond to a sexual stimulant more frequently? And the answer is yes, obviously yes. Okay. Okay, and that's correlations. Neuroplasticity, the human brain and its peripheral neuronal structures can change with stimulation from the environment. What was I watching the other day? What was I reading? Oh, we read that article about aggression and sexual response. And what we discovered was that a high level, not a high level, it was like 18% of males became sexually aroused from the violence rather than anything else. And actually a relatively small percentage of females, but some females actually did as well. What does that tell us about males and females? What kind of pornography are these people going to watch? The males that are stimulated by violence and the females that are stimulated, even though it's much smaller. It's like a third the size. It was 18% and 6%. What kind of pornography are these people going to watch? Probably violent, or they become more sexually aroused with the violence. Even females. So if we have, what do we have? 94% of females do not get sexually aroused by violence, but we still have that 6%. That's still 6%. I know. Okay. The human brain and its peripheral neuronal. Oh, what was I watching the other day? Oh, I was watching yesterday. I was watching a murder mystery, and they were trying to find somebody to pin the crime on, and it was a crime of violence, sexual violence, and so they found an individual that viewed violent pornography, and they tried to pin it on that select individual. Is that a barking dog? Anyway, yeah. So I mean, this is part of the profile. Now, unfortunately, not everybody fits the profile. Oh, what did we have this weekend? We had the shooter in Jacksonville that shot. I guess he only killed one person, but he killed himself, and that's two. But in the beginning, they thought 4 were shot and killed. And then they discovered that there were only 2, but he wounded like 9 people or something. He just started popping away at a video tournament in Jacksonville, Florida. How strange is that? The human brain and its so the reality is we're looking at a relatively large percentage of people, and everybody's armed with an automatic weapon. What's the probability that somebody is going to become a shooter? I mean, everybody's got a gun, so why isn't everybody a shooter? Why are there so few shooters out there? And what triggers them to shoot? Right? That's a bad word. And the answer is we're not exactly sure. We're trying to figure it out, though. We're really trying to figure it out. The human brain and its peripheral neuronal structures can change with stimulation from the environment. This is known as neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is really, really important because we can change. We can learn something just by observing it once, and that's neuroplasticity. And the reason we have neuroplasticity is because of a part of the neuron called the dendritic spines. And these things will come up almost instantaneously. So all we need is a new experience, and these dendritic spines will come up. They seem to be in constant motion. They can change shape in a matter of seconds. In a very real way, other individuals can affect the change on the structure of an individual's brain. Really kind of curious. If you've ever been in a situation where somebody was shooting at you, some people react really, really slow. And other individuals who have been through that experience before, they react very rapidly. Now the question is, so everybody in the beginning will react relatively slow. They won't react properly, and they may get killed. But the second time, they should react properly. In a combat situation, we used to refer to those guys as greenies. They were the ones that reacted slow. So they would always put one of these individuals that reacted slow with somebody that had more experience. So as soon as something happened, they would grab a hold of this guy and pull him down to get out of harm's way, potentially. Now the question was, how many times do you have to do that before the guy figures out, oh, wait a minute, I need to respond this way? And the answer is, it all depends on dendritic spines. It all depends on how rapidly they can experience something and then get that information. In a very real way, other individuals can affect change on the structure of an individual's brain. So if somebody's a bully, somebody comes up to you and they bully you, potentially you're going to, you should respond properly to that. So other individuals can affect the way that you react. Can affect the way your brain is structured, strangely enough. So if you're not in a dangerous situation, then of course you're going to react one way, but if you do get into a dangerous situation, you need to figure out how to react in order to stay out of harm's way. That's the answer to the question. But so people around you can affect the way that you react. So if you're in an environment that there is no danger, potentially you won't know how to react to a dangerous situation. But if you grow up in an environment that is relatively dangerous, you will probably learn, you should learn to be able to react rapidly to a dangerous situation. So the individuals that survived in a combat situation were the ones who had grown up in really bad situations, in a dangerous situation. They reacted properly the first time. So they weren't the ones that were shot. They were the ones that were wounded and sent home. Stimulation will induce neuronal growth, of course. Lack of stimulation will retard neuronal growth. Now, this is really kind of interesting because if we look at a situation like the situation in just north of Santa Fe, in that compound where they have the 11 kids, and they have the one kid that died, but we won't talk about the one kid that died. How about those 11 kids that survived? They were training them to be school shooters. So they were changing their neuronal structure. And the question is, will they ever be able to live in society? That's the real question. Because this has already happened to them. They've already been trained in a select way. Their brain has already been developed in a certain way. Now, the way that this works, we can't just throw them in jail at 5. It just isn't, that's not the way it works. But the question is, will they ever be functional members of society? A good example is a pit bull. A pit bull that's raised in a bad environment, will they ever be able to function in a normal environment? If they've been trained, if they've been raised to be a fighter, can we ever get that out of them? Can we ever change their brains so that they won't be dangerous? No. The only thing we can do is euthanize them. They're just too much of a danger to society. because they've been trained to kill. And they will kill. And they'll kill anything smaller than that. I had a dog that was a pointer. Pointers aren't really fighters. Pointers are supposed to go out and actually they're supposed to find the bird and point to the bird, and then you shoot the bird, and then it goes and gets the bird. And when it brings it to you, the bird's supposed to be dead. So even if you wounded the bird, he's supposed to kill the bird and bring it back to you. He's supposed to bring it back to you dead. So they are trained not only to point, retrieve, but also to kill when they get there. So how do they do that? How do dogs kill things? They kill by crushing. They will grab a hold of the bird and they'll just bite down, and it crushes the rib cage and kills it. So the bird isn't supposed to be alive when it brings it back. So I had a dog that was a pointer, and we found him out in the middle of nowhere. He was a good bird dog. He would have been a good bird dog. Of course, I'm not a hunter, and certainly don't hunt quail or pheasants or whatever, or ducks or. So for us, he wasn't a very good dog because that was in his brain. We couldn't get it out. So anything smaller than him, he would try to catch it and crush it, because that's the way he was trained. And he killed several cats. Well, he may have killed a dog, a small dog, but I don't know if he did or not.
So how do you fix those individuals that have like those that are like for us we would say abnormal, like that aberration behavior?
How do you fix them? Well,
Like for instance, like the children that you were talking
right.
about.
Well, you can condition it out of them, hopefully. Potentially you can. But I don't know. Does it work?
I didn't know. I was just thinking about it because there's a guy that I know. See, like how he was grown up is like completely different from how I was grown up.
Right.
So with him, he's more like rough.
Sure.
And I know a person, they have to make up their own mind in order to change. But
Right.
then, like, I know that, but like, how could you try to help the individual to try to seek better?
So we're talking about, we're talking about antisocial personality disorder. So how in the world can we help these people? A lot of times, if they can get away with stuff, they will continue to get away with stuff until somebody arrests them. So you can't fix it. Yeah, you're right. They have to want to be fixed. If they're getting something from their bad behavior, from this type of behavior, bullies, for example, they will get lunch money or whatever. It's really hard to condition them to change unless they want to change. A lot of times what you see is you'll have an individual that's a bully or an individual that does something negative, and then he meets somebody and he decides he wants to be the person that person wants him to be. Love changes everything. Well, not really. What has happened is he has changed his desire. He has changed the way he acts because of his desire to be like somebody else. Now we're going to be okay unless he gets into a traumatic situation. And because of the traumatic situation, he is conditioned to react in a select way. Okay. And this is one of the reasons why you'll have somebody that marries somebody and everything will be fine for like 2 or 3 years, then they get into a sticky situation. She disagrees with him, and what happens next? But he starts reacting the way that he's been conditioned to react, which is usually with violence. So now we've got an abusive husband. So the answer is, yes, you're right. He can only change if he wants to change. We can try to condition it out of him, but usually, especially if he's an attractive individual. If he's an attractive individual, he gets stuff by being the way that he is. So he's not going to want to change. In which case, he'll end up in jail. Eventually, he'll end up in jail. So that's the way this usually ends up. isolated in a way. So you've got a friend that grew up differently than you did. Maybe he was abused as a child, and now he abuses as an adult because that's the way he was trained to do things. Spoil the rod and spare the rod and spoil the child, and now we've got a situation where this guy is overly aggressive and does negative things from time to time. So there is no answer. Okay. He can change if he wants to, but he has to be the one who wants to change. And sometimes he will revert back to the way he was before in a negative situation. Researchers have been able to induce the brains of human subjects to be more active by suggesting to select individuals that water that they would be dipping their hands in would be hot. They told them that the water was hot, so when they touched the water, they felt it as hot because their brain had already told them it was hot. Well, the reality was it wasn't hot at all, but they thought that they were burning their hands, so they pulled their hands away. In other words, they just suggested it to them, and of course it activated their brains. Subjects who did not experience the suggestion had less active brain activity and reported less discomfort from the water. If you think something's going to hurt, then it will hurt. I have bad teeth. It's one of my flaws. And I go to the dentist a lot. Way too much. And when I go to the dentist, this can hurt or that can hurt. Drilling can hurt. When they inject you with the Novocaine, that hurts like the devil. Or could it can. But I usually try to convince myself before I go, I would much rather, and this is what I tell the dentist, I'd much rather go to the dentist than I would to get a haircut. I hate getting haircuts because I always look so goofy afterwards. Anyway, I don't think I can get on the internet, but you can watch this. It's really kind of fascinating. It's about the human biome. The human biome means that we have more bacteria in our body than we have cells in our body. So our stomachs are full of bacteria, our guts are full of bacteria, our mouths are full of bacteria. We have bacteria all over our hands to protect us. So we are a mass of not only human cells, but also bacteria. And the different type of bacteria that we have in our systems controls the food that we eat. So if we eat too much sugar, we're going to have too many of one type of bacteria in our body, in our systems, and not enough of other bacteria. If we consume a lot of vegetables, broccoli and cauliflower, corn, whatever, then we will have one type of bacteria in our systems. And this is one of the reasons why if you live in Arizona and you eat food from Arizona, that your biome will be completely different from somebody that lives back east, or somebody that lives in the Midwest, where they grow radishes and what else do we have? Peas. My wife had fresh peas the other day. When was the last time you guys had fresh peas? She had to shell all the peas. She mixed it with pasta. I know, my wife and I eat differently. Anyway, because of the food that you eat, you have different bacteria in your systems. And sometimes if you go someplace like down to Mexico and you eat food from Mexico, they eat a lot of chilies down there, a lot of really hot chilies, and their biome will be completely different. And this is one of the reasons why if you go to Mexico, you might get sick right away. You might have a reaction to their food, even though it's not dysentery. It's not really a bacteria. It's not a bacteria on the food, it is the food itself that's causing the problem. So it all depends on the food that you eat. If you watch Big Bang Theory, kind of a fascinating show, they eat the same sequence of food every week. So Thursday is Thai food day. They have pizza on Fridays, that kind of stuff. Okay, but you can do that, and of course, as long as you maintain the same diet on a relatively regular basis, your biome will be the same. It can change your the pattern of your evacuation. In other words, it can change the consistency of your stool, and because of that, of course, you will have diarrhea one day and you'll be constipated the next day. That kind of thing. So all of these things have to do with maintaining ourselves. And it has to do with us being a biome. And that's actually what this is all about. You can change your, if you eat the same thing over and over again and it's not good food, then potentially you can hurt yourself. Potentially you can. Because you'll lose those bacteria. This is one of the reasons why they're talking so much about probiotics. The problem with probiotics is that they are generic. So if you take probiotics, they develop those probiotics for select individuals. Activia is a good example. Activia are probiotics for females. And females have different digestive systems than males do.
I would say yes.
They do. Their stomachs are smaller. They eat more vegetable matter. Males eat more meat. They eat more starches for energy. That tends to be the way it works. If a woman eats too many starches, starch is a sugar. Yeah, it's a very complex sugar, and it provides a lot of energy. So the more starches you eat, the more energy you have potentially. But of course, if you don't burn up all those calories, then now you've got a problem because you start gaining weight. And potentially, if you gain too much weight across your stomach, then you'll have diabetes. Many times psychological research follows a plan of reductionism. The researchers begin with a general behavioral reaction, and then they follow it from the behavior to the central nervous system. We see this all the time. We see this with diseases. Diabetes. Where did diabetes come from? When I was working in medicine, when I first started working in medicine, there wasn't that many people with type 2 diabetes. Now it's rampant. What the hell has happened? What in the world is going on? Well, we had to figure that out. Have we contaminated people with aluminum or some toxic waste in the environment? Is that what's going on?
Me and this one, the new work, my coworker, we were talking about something about GMO, and I was questioning what is GMO? Because
Right.
It was genetic modified organism. I think that's how I put it. And it's somehow they'll take strands off like fruits, animals, or some and modify it to where since our population is growing, they put that into it, it can grow faster, more superior to the masses.
Sure.
It's kind of like alerted to what comes in through to any cafeteria or any restaurant.
Sure.
Goes back to what you missed out on as for me as a kid going like in the cornfields,
Correct.
just right from your backyard to
Correct.
going to drive out towards probably Napa. You'll see all that what they're going over there, and you kind of think how they grew.
I have a friend in college that he's a multi-millionaire now because he's the one that developed the whole GMO thing.
Yeah.
He started modifying genes. Now it's really kind of interesting. In the old days, if you had a loaf of bread for a week, it would be stale.
Mm-hmm.
Not anymore. Somehow it's still maintaining its moisture. How's that happen? What's going on? It's really kind of fascinating. And of course, we don't know what those GMOs are going to do to people, genetically modified organisms. We don't know what that's going to do to people. We won't know until down the road someplace. So potentially we're creating a monster, and those monsters will be us, potentially. We don't know. We don't know what it's going to do to us. Is it going to cause cancers? Is it going to cause diabetes? Is it going to cause lupus erythematosus? We don't know. We don't know if we're going to see more and more of this. But one of the things we are seeing, and this is what we're trying to figure out, where in the world is all the type 2 diabetes coming from? And it looks like it's coming from too much sugar and too sedentary a lifestyle. It looks like where it's coming from. Like I said, when I first started in medicine, there weren't that many cases of type 2 diabetes. And we didn't even call it type 2 diabetes at the time. We called it adult onset diabetes. And now we call it type 2 diabetes. Then we have child onset diabetes is what we used to call it. But you're born with it, type 1 diabetes. But now we're seeing type 1 diabetes being developed in adolescence. We never saw that before. All of a sudden we're seeing all kinds of interesting things. So what we have to do is we have to figure out where this comes from. We see the problem, we see the potential problem, and now we're going to try to break it down into its various parts. We're going to try to go and find out what area of the brain it is affecting and why that area is being affected. Looking at the response in the brain, they locate the area of the brain that was affected. And we can do this with PET scans or MRIs or any other type of, and we're going to talk about that in the next chapter. From the affected area, they isolate the single nerves that are affected. So what area of the brain are we talking about? Are we talking about the hypothalamus? Are we talking about the thalamus? Are we talking about the hippocampus? They then look at the chemical changes that take place in the neuron. And this is how we discovered what depression was. We treated depression with a lot of different things. It worked, but we weren't exactly sure why. Eventually we got to the point where we could actually locate in the area of the brain where depression is. And what we discovered was it was all over the place. What does this have to do with? What type of chemical works all over the brain? Well, a lot of neurotransmitters work all over the brain, but then we isolated it as norepinephrine and serotonin. We already knew that these medications affected norepinephrine and serotonin, so we assumed that was the problem. So then we had to look at where the serotonin comes from. Is that the area of the brain that is affected by the depression? And the answer was yes. So then we looked at those chemicals, and now we have improved the type of medication that we can give someone. We can increase their norepinephrine level and change their depression, or we can change their serotonin. One of the things we discovered once upon a time in a land far, far away, about in the 1990s, we discovered that Prozac worked on depression. It was a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It only affected serotonin. And one of the other things that we discovered was if we give somebody Prozac, it usually takes their depression away. But there are side effects. And of course we didn't talk about the side effects because we were really happy that we had taken care of the depression. But then we discovered it's not working on everybody. Initially they said it was like 95% of the people that take Prozac and are depressed, they will recover from their depression. It will improve their depression. And then we realized, it's not quite that high. It's more like 75%. Then we realized, it's not even 75%. It's more like 65%. Now we've figured it's more like 50%. But things change over time. Prozac was invented in the early 90s. What was going on in the early 90s?
Everybody coming off drugs.
Everybody was coming off drugs. Well, maybe. The other thing that happened was the internet was invented in 1993. So we're treating these people with Prozac. We've got 90%. All of a sudden, we've got the number of people that are recovering is declining. Does it have anything to do with the internet? Can it possibly have anything to do with the internet? Then all of a sudden, cell phones were invented. Now people are constantly communicating with one another. Now the number of people with depression is increasing. Does it have anything to do with cell phones? Have we changed the food that people are eating? Are they eating less? And now all of a sudden they're more sedentary because they're doing things in front of the computer, in front of television sets. All day long they're on the computer playing these video games. They're so sedentary. And the Prozac's not working as well anymore. What's happened? Can we blame computers for depression? Is it depressing? Does it depress you to be in front of a computer all day? Whereas before you were out and things were changing and you were out in nature and you were breathing fresh air. Is it possible?
I would say, yeah.
Yeah. So you're in a room, and unless you've got the window open, there's no air circulating, you're putting off carbon dioxide. The longer you're in that room where it's relatively shut down, the more carbon dioxide, less oxygen in the room. Are you getting a good picture?
Yes.
And maybe you're farting while you're in there, and that's methane. Now all of us, methane's poison.
I used to work in a warehouse, big old warehouse, and there was this inside, being in a trailer, loading stuff, and then compare that with working outside, any kind of labor, obviously the railroad.
Sure.
It's outside, it's different.
Changing air constantly, circulating air inside that big cube. There's no circulating air, so you're building up carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide's building up. Potentially, there's methane in the air, and all those negative things are happening. Using the technique of reductionism, researchers can break down the complex mechanism that leads to brain malfunctions. Hopefully we can. About 19% of all Americans suffer from some form of psychiatric disorder. Another 3.2% suffer from some neurological disorder. The fastest growing affliction in industrialized countries is Alzheimer's disease. What causes Alzheimer's disease? Do we know? No, we don't. So why is it growing in industrialized countries? Why is Alzheimer's disease growing? This is something really serious. What's happening? What's happening to us? I'm almost 70 years old. When I was born, my life expectancy was 59. That's when I was born. I was born in 1949. My life expectancy was 59. So I'm 70 and I feel great. However, if I had grown up to be almost 70 years old and died in 1949, why would I have died? What's the difference in me living now and me living then? Why am I so healthy in 2018? And I wouldn't have been that healthy in 1949 when I was born. What's the difference? Lots of things change. One of the things that changes in 1949, almost everybody smoked. You couldn't get away from it. If you went into somebody's house, they had ashtrays full of cigarette butts. Secondhand and third-hand smoke was all over the place. Not anymore. Now you can't even smoke in a public place, right? Yeah. So a lot of things have changed. Tobacco was very destructive. People drank more back then. Well, maybe not. I don't drink at all. So, there are more drugs now than there were back then. But only a select portion of the population are using those drugs. Back then, 60 miles an hour was probably the speed limit on just about any road you would go on. We didn't even have interstates back then. So almost all roads were two-lane highways. People were killing themselves trying to pass people in the old days. Cars put off, all gasoline was leaded gasoline back then. And lead is poison. It's a heavy metal. Now there is no leaded gas. Well, there is. But you have to go to a drag strip to find it. Jet fuel has lead in it. I mean, everything has changed. And the things that used to kill us, especially the tobacco, people aren't doing it anymore. So I've lived to be 70 years old. I had a friend that died last year. They talk about Danny all the time. Danny died of the same heart attack I had 8 years ago. I had a heart attack 8 years ago. And he died, but he died from his heart attack. And I told him that, hey, if you don't stop smoking, then if you ever get into a crisis, it's just going to kill you. And he did, it killed him. Stupid bastard. if he'd done what I told him to do, he'd be alive today, but he's dead. My friend Danny. Anyway, so he's dead. And he smoked. He died at 65. Died at 65. And I had a heart attack at 60, and I survived mine. Mine was even worse than his was. I had no damage from my heart attack because I exercise. He's a lazy piece of crap. Ate too much fat. Ate too many fatty foods. Anyway, he's dead and I'm alive. So what's the answer to the question? So where does Alzheimer's disease come from? Why is there more Alzheimer's disease? Is it in my future? Alzheimer's disease. My mother died at 98. No Alzheimer's disease. So why more Alzheimer's disease now than there ever has been before? People are living longer. The longer you live, the more likely you'll get Alzheimer's disease. And that's why it's increasing. All right. Psychiatric disorders, as you can see, the number one psychiatric disorder is anxiety, severe anxiety. A lot of people are anxious. There's too many people close to you, and you don't know who they are. Anxiety is number one. Number two is alcohol and drug abuse. 15 million people in the United States suffer from alcohol and drug abuse. Severe depression at 10 million, schizophrenia at 1.5 million. We look at the neurological disorders, we can see that Alzheimer's disease is number one. Epilepsy is number two. Epilepsy rarely kills you, but sometimes it does. Stroke, of course, is number three. And then we have head and spinal cord trauma. This is usually from automobile accidents, but since we sent troops over to Afghanistan and Iraq, we have a lot of people coming back with problems. Early developmental disorders, 750,000, that will never change. But we're having fewer children in the United States. The white population especially is not having very many children. And that's one of the reasons why we need immigrants to keep coming into the United States. Most of the countries of Europe are at below zero population growth. They have a negative population growth. Germany's had it since 1950. Italy has had it since 1952. So the people over Europe are not reproducing themselves. And so they need somebody to come in and do the trivial work of survival. And that's why they need more immigrants. And we need immigrants in the United States as well. Much of the research dealing with psychology is done with other species. We don't do research on each other. We try not to. I'm not going to stick an electrode in anybody's brain, but I'll stick an electrode in a rat's brain anytime. By comparing the reactions of other species, researchers are able to judge how humans will react in similar situations. About 93% of the animals that we test are rodents, because we don't like them, and we don't mind killing them. When I was, this is back in the 1970s, we were trying to figure out how we would create a colony on the moon. So we were working with animals and oxygen deprivation. And this was at, where was it? Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And so they were using other animals. They couldn't use humans, that they wouldn't want to do that. So we had to use an animal that had a very similar respiratory system to humans. And so the animal that we used was, they tried rats and they tried mice, it didn't work. So we went up a notch to another species. And the species we went to were canines. Not any canine. We needed a canine whose body structure and weight distribution was very similar to humans. So the animal we went to was the beagle dogs. So we had all these beagles that we were, cute little beagles, rabbit hunting beagle dogs. Snoopy, we were doing our research on Snoopy. It was really kind of funny because they had a hard time finding somebody to euthanize the dogs. So guess who they picked? Not me, no. It would have broken my heart. The other day I was watching a movie and they showed this dead thing in the creek, and if you looked at it from the angle where I was sitting, the angle of the camera, it looked like it might be a dog, and it just broke my heart. This guy's dog was dead. I just really hurt my feelings. I almost started crying. And then they panned up, and it turned out to be a human. I'm going, oh, phew. Oh, good. At least it's not a dog. It was a girl with hair all over the place, as odd as it seems. Anyway, they found a guy to euthanize who didn't mind killing the dog. You know, nobody wanted to kill the dogs except this one guy. He was a native guy. He was Laguna. He was from Laguna Pueblo. He was good at it, and he'd do it quick. He had no feelings whatsoever for the dogs. He was kind of a funny guy. He was a good friend of mine. His wife was Kiowa. She's from Oklahoma, and he's from over here. I don't know whatever happened to that guy. I never figured out what happened to him. Maybe he's over there. I don't know. Every time I stop for a hamburger, I always think maybe I'll run into him.
I used to live in Laguna a while back.
Oh, is that right? Oh, is that the Pueblo itself?
Right where the laundry and the gas station.
Sure. Yeah.
And the library right here. So just right there. Usually, the only place we went to was just the library, the laundromat, and the gas stop. That's about it. Sometimes we go hit up there up on top and have some stuff up there.
Funny people. Real pleasant people. You didn't think so. Well, different situation. Okay. Yeah, he's a Laguna. This is a joke. It causes a death to lab rats. Most of them, of course, are euthanized. This is just, like I said, it's just a joke. A lot of research. I found it and I thought I'd put it in. Only people that hate rats. And I do, I hate rats. I'll euthanize them every time. It was really kind of weird. They talk about how much I hate rats and I don't mind killing them and that kind of stuff. I had a student that had rats in her house. She loved rats. And she was so offended because she was very offended that I said negative things about rats. Her best friends. So let's talk about the nervous system. We're going to talk about the nervous system, and one thing I want you to think about is that when we're talking about this stuff, we're also talking about pharmaceuticals, okay? And we're talking about how pharmaceuticals work. Remember, we need to, they utilize reductionism in order to determine how something works and why something works. So if we are dealing with a new medication or an old medication, we need to figure out what it works on, what it could possibly interfere with. The biggest problem with getting a new drug on the market is the fact that we have to test it and test it and test it to find out what the side effects are. And it may take years. So we may have come up with a cure for cancer, but it's going to take 5 or 10 years to get it approved by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And that makes a lot of sense, because I don't want them giving me a drug that's going to give me another disease. And this type of stuff happens all the time. My wife had surgery over the summer. She had both of her hips replaced, and they were giving her, they gave her opiates, okay, for the pain, which makes a lot of sense because she was in quite a bit of pain. But in order for her to drink or to use the opiates, they also had to give her a stool softener because opiates reduce the action in your gut, in your intestines. So you get constipated. And this is a really serious problem. With some people it's a more serious problem than with others. So they gave her a stool softener. So what did the stool softener do? So the stool softener made her retain water. Now we've taken the pain away. We've kept her from being constipated, okay, with the stool softener. But now that's making her anemic. She's retaining water. So her ankles are blowing up, her feet are blowing up. Okay. And when she told the doctor that, he said, oh, most people don't have that problem. So he gave her edema. And edema is really kind of dangerous. Edema means you're retaining water. Well, if you retain too much water, then it starts to fill up your lungs, and that's known as congestive heart failure. So now we got another problem. But he doesn't recognize it. And he's the one that has created a problem by giving her the stool softener and by giving her the opioids. We've got a doctor who's a surgeon. We don't have a doctor who's a cardiologist. We have a doctor who's a surgeon. So he's giving her congestive heart failure. And she started having trouble breathing. And they told her to go off the stool softener. And of course, she's a good girl. She always wants to do what the doctor tells her. So what happens next? Does she do what I tell her to do, or does she do what the doctor tells her to do? Like I said, she's a good girl.
I think I have the same thing, same problem, but with our car.
Oh, okay.
And I replaced the spark plugs, but it wasn't the spark plugs, it was something else. It would be like the converter. And it wasn't a converter, it was a fuel filter. And it was going around, it was the air intake and all this. And soon I had to get it diagnosed by electronic. And they said it was a fuel injector, exhaust suite.
Right.
The last one was a coolant leak too. So I diagnosed those ones, and my wife got so good about it. Let's just take it to a garage.
Instead of you fixing it yourself. Yeah. Same thing happened. Marius just called me. Marius Begay called me this weekend. He said, you know, I replaced, oh golly, he replaced half of his engine, the poor guy. He said, the next thing is the differential. And I'm thinking, how many of these problems did you cause yourself by fixing it? You know, poor Marius, he's been working on his car all week. So he may not be here tomorrow. If his car doesn't run, I don't know how he's going to get here. Poor guy. And I don't have an extra car. Okay, so what we need to think about is how all this stuff works and what kind of side effects are we creating. Are we creating more problems than we're fixing? And the problem is, and I've complained about this before, doctors are myopic. If they're a cardiologist, that's all they think about is the heart. So they may screw up your lungs to fix your heart. Okay. One of the things my cardiologist does is that he gives me a baby aspirin every day. He wants me to take a baby aspirin. Thin my blood out so I won't have blood clots, and that'll keep me from having a stroke, and that'll keep me from having a heart attack. That's what he tells me. But if somebody punches me, I bruise I bruise very badly, and I've never bruised before, as strange as that may seem. Once upon a time, I was playing soccer, and this guy hit me in the chest, and it ruptured my spleen. Well, if you rupture your spleen, there's an artery that goes into your spleen, and potentially you're going to bleed to death. Well, a lot of people do bleed to death from a ruptured spleen. I didn't, and the reason I didn't was because my blood clotted very rapidly. So then I went into the emergency room, and they couldn't figure out that I had a ruptured spleen, so they sent me home. And I was getting ready for work that night, and of course my ribs were sore. And I raised my arm up like this, and I hemorrhaged. I hemorrhaged into my thorax. So here I am bleeding again like crazy. I didn't bleed to death, obviously. So I had two opportunities, and actually when they went in and did the surgery, they went in and took what was left of my spleen out. He said, your thorax is full of blood. And the other problem was that when they pulled all those blood clots out, it hemorrhaged me. And they couldn't stop it because they had pulled off. They had lowered my blood pressure. Okay, so I'm on the operating table and I'm sitting there and laying there with hardly any heart rate. Of course, my blood's not going to clot because, well, they don't want it to clot. They don't want to send a blood clot into my brain and give me a stroke. So they thinned out my blood, and now they pulled out the clots, and I'm hemorrhaging again. And they can't stop. And they start pumping blood into me. They gave me 6 units of blood. And they said I'd only lost about a unit of blood, even with the ruptured spleen and the second hemorrhaging. But when they pulled that blood clot out, they forced me to hemorrhage again, and I lost 5 units of blood, which is like all of your blood, okay? No, it's a lot of blood. You can't live after losing 6 units of blood. That's 6 pints. 6 pints of blood would just about fill this room up. Anyway, they almost killed me by fixing it. That's my point. So my point is the doctors tend to be myopic. So we need to learn how all of these medications work. And we need to change these things. And if it changes it too drastically, maybe it's going to change you. And if it changes you, maybe you're going to have problems later on. It makes you more sedentary. My doctor just raised my blood pressure medicine. He said, this may make you tired at the end of the day. You may sleep more than you did before. So how in the world am I going to maintain my energy level with this added amount of blood pressure medicine? I'm assuming that was a bird. I'm just curious. Down.
I don't see it anymore.
We have birds up in the cafeteria window. It's fly right birds.
Boom, dive bombing. Okay, so this is what we need to think about. The nervous system is composed of cells called nerve cells or neurons. There's about 100 billion or to 250 billion neurons in your brain. I have a small head, so I probably have fewer neurons than other people. I have a really small head. I discovered how small it was when I joined the military, and they were trying to find a hat to fit me, and they kept sending me farther and farther down, and we got to the last bin of hats, and they said, if your head's too small to fit this hat, then we don't have a hat to fit you. In other words, we're going to kick you out of the service because your head's so damn small. And I put it on and it fit. It was a 6 7/8. It was a really, really small hat. I had the smallest head of anybody in the service. How's that? I know. Does that make me stupid, having a small brain?
You're not an easy target. So.
I'm a really sad target. Exactly. Thank you. I like it. Neurons communicate with each other at a point known as a synapse. Another cell that protects and adds structure to the nervous system are the glial cells. And as we're going to discover, there are an equal number of glial cells to neurons, because the glial cells not only maintain the neurons, but they also protect the neurons. So there's probably actually more glial cells than there are neurons. Now they have estimated that the number of connections in the brain are in the trillions. There are trillions of connections in the brain. This all has to do with stimulation. How much stimulation are you getting? Are you watching too much television? Can you spell? Do you read? How intelligent does that make you? How much stimulation do you seek? I get 13 different magazines, 13 different subjects. I know. So I'm getting all this odd stimulation coming in all the time. I read a lot. I do watch television. It's usually the news. I'm so excited about all the crap that's going on. I don't think we're going to keep this president for very long. It's going to turn out he's a gangster from New York City. Anyway, okay, a neuron is composed of 4 major parts. The part that collects the information is called the dendrite. And these are the dendrites, and there can be all kinds of interesting connections from the dendrites. Another part is the soma. Soma just means body, and this is the area that actually has the nucleus. It's the cell body, the soma. That's the second part. The third part is the axon, and that is the long part that connects it to something. So the information will come in from the dendrite, go through the soma, into the axon, and it'll go all the way down to the end to communicate with something. And the last part of the neuron is the axon terminal, and that's where it distributes the information. So it comes in through the dendrites, goes through the soma, through the axon, and then the information is transmitted through the axon terminals.
So if you go on a roller coaster, all these pick up everything you see.
Exactly. Exactly. Have you ever been driving down the road and you try to focus on a certain point? So you see something in the road, and you see a white spot on the road, and you try to identify it? Okay, it's going by in a nanosecond. But can you focus on that one thing in that nanosecond? Can you determine if that was a dime on the road? Sure you can. Sure you can. Actually, you
I
can.
avoid the potholes from here to now.
There is a really bad pothole, and I have a really small car.
There's actually some dips that go in like this. So I know there's one right before
Wheatfield.
Chapter House, and the Chapter House. And
That's a horrible
There's
one.
one right there, and there's another one right before you get to the bridge right there.
Yeah.
A real deep one. And there's another one when you get to past the bridge, and they go in between.
If I hit those dips too fast, I fly, because my car is really small, and I go not as fast as you guys, right? But they kept passing me. I went to Albuquerque on Saturday, and I got passed a lot by a lot of people. I was going 65 miles an hour. I figured that's fast enough. Neurons can be classified in three basic ways: by the shape of the cell, by the size of the cell, or by the function of the neuron. All right. Multipolar neurons have many dendrites and a single axon. Most of the neurons of the vertebrate system are multipolar, and this is what they look like. The neurons. Shape, size, and function. Bipolar neurons have a single dendrite at one end and a single axon at the other. Bipolar, so they're only connected in two places. You can imagine with a multipolar cell, it's connected in a lot of different places because it's connected with from the dendrites and then the axon terminals. Most of the neurons of the sensory system are bipolar, especially those of the retina and the olfactory system. So that's how we smell and how we see. We look at the retinal structures. These are all bipolar cells. So he gets one piece of information. But in order to make a picture, we are creating millions of little pixels in that picture. That's the way we do it. It's the way our eyes work. And each one is a bipolar cell. So it's giving us one little piece of information, one minuscule little piece of information. And then we are taking all that information and creating a picture. And that's why we can identify that dime on the street, because we can see it in our nanosecond, and we can isolate that nanoseconds worth of information, and we can actually identify it. If you see it. A lot of people don't see very well. A lot of people wear glasses. Either of you guys wear glasses? No? A lot of people wear glasses. I'll say to my wife, we're driving down the road, oh, look, the eagle over there. And I'll point, and she'll look, and she has really bad eyesight, so she can't see it. Or I'll say, did you see the badger on the side of the road? No, she never sees the badger on the side of the road.
It kind of refers to how we're going on a trip to phoenix, and then in the morning this one hawk came down and picked up the paradox. I just plucked it out like this. You could
Oh, is
see,
that right?
You could just probably see, just looking at it and going about 65, you can actually probably see the expression on both.
The prairie dog and the hawk's face.
And it went by quick like that, so it was like.
And then you go, did you see that? Or
Yeah.
look over there. And of course, the hawk is gone and nobody can see it. I know, I have that same problem. I see a lot of things. And I don't always watch the road. A lot of times I'll just watch the side of the road. Assuming that I'm getting enough information that I can stay on the road. And I always have, so I've never had a problem. Not yet, but I'm approaching 70. And things slow down as you get as old as I am. Monopolar neurons have a single branch coming off the soma that branches in two different directions. Those are monopolar neurons. One branch will be the input direction, the other will be the output direction, but there are axons going in both directions. Normally an axon will only go in one direction, but with a monopolar cell, it goes in both directions. So you're getting input and output from the same axon. Some neurons are very large and some are very small. Examples of small cells will be granule, spindle, and stellate neurons. Example of a large neuron would be a pyramidal, Golgi or Purkinje cells, neurons, and we have these in our cerebellum and our cerebrum. These are very large cells connected to a lot of different things. And that's one of the reasons why we can make connections between one thing and another. If we learn about a shooter in Jacksonville, we think, oh, wait a minute, we can connect that to the shooter in Las Vegas. We can connect that to the shooter at Parkland down in Florida. We can connect all these pieces. Functionally, neurons either receive stimuli, create a response, or they connect a response to a stimuli. Sensory neurons collect the stimulus and pass the message onto the vast network of connector neurons or interneurons. This is really kind of an interesting site. It explains to you why drugs work, why select drugs work. So they'll tell you about alcohol, they'll tell you about marijuana, and it's really it's a cartoon is actually what it is. It's a mouse cartoon. And you take the mouse, you pick the mouse up and you put it in the indicator, and the indicator will tell you, oh, this mouse is stoned on marijuana, and this is what is happening in its brain. It's really kind of fascinating, so you might want to take a look at that. It's really kind of fascinating. You will learn what cocaine does to you, or methamphetamine, and you'll learn why methamphetamine is so destructive, as is cocaine. Motoneurons connect to muscles or glands and create the response by making the muscles contract, or by changing the activity of the gland, making the gland function, or making the muscle contract. I was lifting weights on Friday, thinking about why your muscles get big. The reason your muscles get big is because you break down the tissue, and when it rebuilds it larger. That's why it does that. But the reason that they look large is because they're contracted. So the more you lift, the more contracted your muscles get. So the more work that you do, the less functional you become, the less flexible you become, because your muscles have tightened up. And this can be a really serious problem. I had friends, I played softball when I was in the service, and I had a friend that was a bodybuilder. So they went nuts one winter, and they lifted a lot, and they got really, really big. Now, the problem was when they started playing ball the next spring, they were terrible. They could barely hit. They had a hard time catching. They could catch right here, right in front of them, but they couldn't do this because their muscles were too big. And they had a hard time hitting because their chests were so large. It was really kind of weird. So they'd have to bat. They'd bat like this, and then they start swinging, and then they couldn't follow through with both hands. So they had to follow through with the one hand. It was really kind of weird. They were strong. They were really powerful, but they couldn't. They had a hard time. It was just a mess. This is one of the reasons why if you look at basketball players, they'll lift in the off season, then they'll stop during the season because all of a sudden they can't hit anything. They're overthrowing the basket and whatnot. And that's what happens at the beginning of the game as well. They don't hit their first shot because they're overshooting, because of all the adrenaline that's going through their system. Neurons do not touch each other, but communicate between the dendrite of one neuron and the axon of another across a gap known as a synaptic cleft. At the end of the axon is the axon terminal. The axons end in expanded areas called buttons or boutons. That's French for button. So there is a gap here, and that there is a chemical that will go across the gap, and that's what creates our response. A good example would be serotonin. Serotonin makes us feel good. So the more serotonin we have in the synaptic cleft, the less likely we're going to be depressed. The better we're going to feel, the more serotonin we have. So how in the world do we keep a lot of serotonin in our synaptic clefts? Activity will increase your, especially exercise, will increase your serotonin level. That works. We can eat foods that create serotonin. Fatty foods have tryptophan in them. The tryptophan is a precursor for serotonin. So the more of these foods we eat, the less depressed we are going to be.
What about emotion like romance or love?
That is a series of neurotransmitters. So we can eat foods that make us feel like we are in love. Well, it doesn't work on you and me, but it works on Treva over there. It works more on females than it does on males, as odd as that may seem.
Oh, you were saying about chocolate, huh?
Chocolate, that's why chocolate works. That's how chocolate works. Chocolate increases all of these chemicals in your brain. Well, your brain, not especially my brain. If I eat chocolate, I'm not going to fall in love with whoever I see on television. It's not like an aphrodisiac. I'm suddenly going to fall in love. It just doesn't work that way. But women, it makes them feel friendlier, I guess. That's one of the reasons why they give women chocolate on Valentine's Day. Makes them feel like they're loved. So if you are depressed, if somebody breaks up with you, you can eat chocolate, it'll make you feel better. Hopefully. It doesn't make you pine for the individual that you just lost. But you can also make yourself feel better by eating fatty foods. Does it especially work with men? Men need a real surge of something. So they'd have to eat a lot of fat. Drink bacon grease or something. Yeah, that's not going to work. So what we have to do is raise our testosterone, and we do that by exercise. So that's usually if a male gets depressed, he goes out and does something physical, and a woman eats a gallon of ice cream. It works. Works for you, works for the guy. The end of the axon is known as presynaptic zone. The area of the receiving dendrite is known as a postsynaptic zone. The message is actually transported by a chemical known, of course, as a neurotransmitter. We just talked about that. It's contained in spheres in the axons called synaptic vesicles. And you can see the synaptic vesicles here. These are all synaptic vesicles. They have different neurotransmitters. If the message, if the stimuli needs serotonin to be shot into the synaptic cleft, that's what will happen. If it has to be acetylcholine, then it'll shoot that into the synaptic cleft. The synaptic vesicles control all this. And these are the vesicles right here. Okay, so how does it release the chemical? How does it release the neurotransmitter? Well, the way it releases the neurotransmitter is the calcium channels open. So we've got sodium and potassium making the neuron function. And then when it gets down to the axon terminal, it opens up the calcium channels. And the calcium channels will stimulate these vesicles to go to the synaptic cleft and release its neurotransmitter. So we've got three chemicals that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with potassium, we're dealing with sodium, and we're also dealing with calcium. Now this gets really exciting when we start talking about sodium blockers, sodium channel blockers, or potassium channel blockers, or calcium channel blockers. We can control high blood pressure with a calcium channel blocker. So you have less of a response. And that works. We can give you a calcium channel blocker. The problem with giving you a calcium channel blocker, it blocks not only the activating neurons that keep your heart, make your heart beat faster and increase your blood pressure, but it also will limit your emotional response. People don't like that. So, but we can give you a calcium, to keep you alive, we'll give you a calcium channel blocker. But now you don't feel like yourself. You don't have the same response that you had before. As interesting as that is. Okay. So, you know, there's always a side effect to everything that we do. One of the interesting areas of the study dealing with neurons are projections coming from the dendrites called spines. Dendritic spines, we talked about these before. These spines seem to change with experience and have been known to change within seconds when an individual is exposed to a novel stimuli. And they come in a lot of different forms, as you can see. And this allows you to react rapidly to something that just happened to you. You have learned that. Now the next time something happens like this, you hear somebody, or you hear a bullet going over your head, you know to duck. The first time you heard it, you were going, what's that? Did you hear that? But the second time you hear it, now you know to hit the dirt, to get as low as possible, so you don't get hit in the head with a bullet. You certainly don't want that to happen. Okay. So all these spines will change in a nanosecond. They can change. So you're playing defense, you're playing basketball, you're playing defense, and somebody comes in. Is it time? I'm sorry. So you're playing defense against a guy, and he breaks to your right, and you react slowly. The next time you're going to react a lot faster. You've learned things because of these dendritic spines. And of course, you're going to go with him and you're going to block the shot. He's not going to drive around you this time. You're going to get in front of him. He's going to.
Unless you're Larry Bird.
Larry Bird will just do one of those fading jump shots. Okay. Thank you. I apologize for going over, but we need to stop right now. That's fascinating.